Fun with tax proration and junk and stuff. Or
What's
just
that?
fun with tax proration.
Proration?
Yeah, tax proration. Let's see.
If I'm chewing too loud, just throw something at me.
Come on.
You want to talk to me for a second?
Maybe. I don't know. Are you a nice person to talk to, or are you just going to give me some stuff? Huh? Huh? That's what I want to know.
Really nice.
Okay, fine.
You're good.
Another shot.
All right, you're good.
Are we on?
Yep.
Good afternoon. Now you may be wondering why I'm doing this with a golf club today's session and a golf hat and some golf tees. Not that it has any link to the upcoming golf outing, and that if you haven't signed up already, you probably should. It's a lot of fun, and of course, it has everything to do with that. So anyway, welcome to the live stream today. We had a question come up over the weekend, which was about tax proration. And there is confusion about tax proration, fiscal year versus calendar year. And I wanted to dig down a little bit in that and try to explain why it is so confusing. It is very confusing. Back in the day, back in that day when I started in the business, which seems like a century ago, everything was done by fiscal year proration. I'll get into what fiscal year proration is in a bit, but for right now, fiscal year proration is the way that everything was done. The problem with fiscal year proration is that you have to identify whether it is fiscal year proration as perceived in advance or if it is perceived in arrears. So, I'm going to explain that more in a minute. But I want to start out with an explanation that this confusion caused a lot of, what do we call those? Oh yeah, lawsuits. And so, after many lawsuits and a lot of confusion, the many boards went to calendar year proration as the default choice with their purchase agreements. And I'm going to explain calendar year proration first, because let's try that again. Sometimes I can write upside down and other times not. Okay, calendar year proration is very simple. It means that there's a bill that comes due on July 1, and there is a tax bill that comes due on December 1. And the way we calculate who owes what at a closing depends on the period of time that the seller has lived in the property during that particular tax year. So, under calendar year proration, let's pretend that we do a closing here at about, well, let's just say May 1. That's not exact. Then what happens is the seller is charged for that period of time that they live in the property. And that will become a debit on their HUD statement. So let's just say that the tax bill is roughly $2,000, and I'm just going to use thumbnails here, but let's say it's $2,000. That looks like roughly a third, so we'll say somewhere in the neighborhood of, we'll just say $700 of the total year's tax bill is going to be charged to the seller. Now, you've probably run into sellers who go, well, wait a minute, I've already paid the taxes. Well, if they've already paid the taxes, the next question asks, are you sure you've paid the taxes when they actually haven't been billed yet this year? And what they're probably telling you is, I paid the taxes for December 1 back in January, so I already paid this year. Well, the problem is they paid for last year. That December 1, if you read the purchase agreements carefully, it says tax bills which are due and payable and a lien or both shall be paid by the seller, and so on and so forth. So if you look at December 1 and July 1, they actually become a lien on the property as of that date, even though in July you can pay them as late as September, and in the December bill you can pay them as late as mid-January. They become a lien on the property on the date that they are sent out. Okay? So, in this particular case, the seller would have to pay $700 or thereabouts on a $2,000 tax bill, roughly about $700 for a third of the year that they lived in the property from January 1 to roughly the 1st of May-ish. And then the seller, and again, I'm not doing this, I'm not getting out a calculator to do this. So that's 5 months out of 12. It's pretty close to a third of a year, roughly. And then the buyer would be responsible for the remaining $1,300. Again, these are thumbnail sketches. They're not exact numbers. I want to show you the concept and help you understand. The calendar year proration is really very simple. It takes the whole year. If you're closing it here, it takes an estimate for both of these based on prior years, puts that whole amount together, and then it splits it up based on the period of time that the seller owns the property and the period of time that the buyer will own the property. Are we clear? If not, we have a comment section. Send us a question. We'll answer it. Now, let's go to the old fiscal year proration. This is where it gets ugly. See if I can write upside down this time. I can't make anything right. Okay, fiscal year proration is different. Here's where you have two timelines. One goes from July 1 to June 30th, of the following year. And this, somewhere right about here, is the break in the year. And concurrently, there is another bill that runs from December 1 to November 30th. Now, that's fiscal year proration. There's actually two different tax bills running at the same time. So in order to calculate fiscal year proration, you have to determine if the taxes for that municipality are perceived to be paid in advance or in arrears. That's where you get into a problem. The reason is this. Many in fact, most municipalities, most tax bodies perceive that property taxes are paid in arrears. In other words, you get to the end of it and you pay for the taxes going back to the prior year. Okay? That's taxes paid in arrears. Well, what happens if you say taxes are going to be paid in arrears, fiscal year proration, and paid as if they are in arrears? Well, what that does is it actually asks the seller to take their amount of money that they would owe living in the property during that first half of the portion of the year, and rebate that or credit that to the buyer's closing statement, so that the buyer will have the money to pay the taxes when the tax bill comes due on July 1st or December 1st. Follow that? That's taxes paid in arrears. And that is the way it's perceived in Detroit, for example, and it is Southwest Michigan sees it that way. I'm not familiar with all of the tax markets, but taxes paid in arrears is more often the way that municipalities perceive the taxes being paid. So it makes a big difference, because the opposite is true if you do it taxes paid in advance. Again, I'm going to do the same thing. We'll do little drawy things. And this is taxes paid in advance. Okay? Tax proration. Okay. Fiscal year. So, taxes paid in advance assumes that the seller has paid the taxes forward for the next 12 months of these concurrently running tax cycles. So, if you, in the middle of it, have a closing, then the seller thinks that they're going to get reimbursed for the taxes that they've paid in advance. That's going to go back to the seller, as is that. You see the problem here? The problem is that when you write fiscal year proration, if you don't specify taxes paid in arrears versus taxes paid in advance, the likelihood is you're going to get in a real messy argument when closing time comes. Because each party, for example, if the buyer is coming from another market, say Chicago or Detroit or someplace else, they're going to perceive they may perceive that taxes are being paid in arrears in that location, whereas Grand Rapids, for example, is one area where even the city of Grand Rapids will tell its taxpayers that they're paying in advance, which doesn't help us, but it has nothing to do with the contract. The city of Grand Rapids perception of whether taxes are paid in advance or arrears has absolutely no bearing on what the purchase agreement says. And the purchase agreement says that if you're going to use taxes paid by calendar year, in other words, you take the whole amount and you divvy it up based on the time that each party lives in the property. This has nothing to do with what City of Grand Rapids perceives is that the taxpayers are paying taxes in advance. Now, it's a mess. Strongly recommend that you use calendar year proration, but sometimes, and I have had this happen just recently, sellers are adamant, just adamant, that they are going to, that they have paid the taxes in advance and they want to be reimbursed by that buyer. And they will not, no matter how much you explain that it has nothing to do with the purchase agreement, that the purchase agreement is saying calendar year proration, they don't care. And so you have to be very clear and try to explain this tax proration issue when the buyers are writing their offer, as well as when the sellers are accepting it, that that we're doing this calendar year proration. Basically everything, the whole year's tax bill that comes due in 2019 is going to be thrown into a pot and divvied up according to the period of time, the percentage of time that each party lives in the property. Questions? Let's see. Oh, we had an interesting one on a condo just minutes ago, actually. And this is very fascinating. First of all, the inspection, this is really, really important. The inspection is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. The inspection contingency is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. You don't just get to claim an inspection contingency, and say, oh, I want out of the deal, without having done the inspections and or the investigations. Now, the investigations, mind you, is limited to two things. One is whether or not they can get insurance on the property and whether or not the property suits their intended use. Those are two very important things. But it does not extend to such investigations as, let's say, crime statistics in the area, for example. It doesn't extend to that unless you stipulate that in the contract. And I would be very careful about doing that. So it only, the investigations portion of it only pertains to intended use and the ability to get insurance. If the buyers don't do inspections and then they decide, well, we've gotten cold feet and we want to get out of the deal, we're going to use the inspection contingency. And a lot of agents out there believe that you can use the inspection contingency to get out of the contract no matter what. It's just basically a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's not. If they don't do the inspections, if the buyers don't do the inspections or have them performed or have justification for bailing out because of the buyer's intended use or the property's insurability, we find this a lot with floodplain properties, then the EMD is really in dispute because the buyer's in breach of contract if they bail out without having done the inspections. On the other hand, if they call their attorney and they say to their attorney, our intended use of this property is, let's say to have a dog grooming, part-time dog grooming business we take in dogs into the basement and we groom them. And the attorney says, wow, I think you're opening yourself up to get sued by the association. Now you have, the buyer has grounds to bail out under the inspection contingency because they may not be allowed to use the property as they intended. It's very tricky. So when you run into questions like this, give me a call. And we have to have all of the information. Let's see. Megan asks, time lived in the property or time they own the property? Time they own the property. The occupancy does not matter. If they get 30 days or 60 days, 45 days, whatever it is, the calculation for proration of taxes, regardless of whether it's an advance or arrears or calendar year, is calculated based on the closing date when ownership of the property transfers. Hope that answers that question. What else we got? Another one? Okay. I don't know if I mentioned the golf outing. Sign up. It's a lot of fun. This is a time of year that a lot of agents get really, 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 really busy. All of us. If we're out there selling real estate, this is going to be the time of year where it's really important to make sure your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted, and that everything you do is in writing and is signed, fully signed. I've seen a lot of instances just in the last week where there were documents that were not fully signed, and as a result, there was no actual purchase agreement ever agreed to, or price reduction, or whatever. So take your time, take a deep breath, make sure all your blanks are filled in, because this is the time of year that agents start to rush. And we don't want you to end up, in a grievance committee or in a courtroom simply because you failed to put something in writing that should have been in writing. I guess that's really all I have to say about that. What else? Oh, Ninja's coming. Ninja. Sign up for Ninja if you haven't already. It's a great program. More information is coming on that one. What else? Any questions? We've been doing this for about 20 minutes, and Kai is telling me we got no questions. So, all right. Again, if you watch this as regards the tax proration, it's sort of like makes your head explode. I get that. But I used to actually teach fiscal year proration back in the days when we used it a lot. And while it is confusing, there are going to be situations where it is going to be, your seller may say, I'm adamant that I want fiscal year proration, as it's perceived, as taxes are perceived to be paid in advance, and I want to be reimbursed by the buyer for the taxes that I feel I have paid forward. You may find that you're just not going to get out of that. Likewise, there are buyers that are going to come from other markets, as I mentioned, Chicago and Detroit and Southwest Michigan, for example, where they see taxes as being paid in arrears. And they are going to want the seller to give them the money for the portion of time that they lived in the property so that they can have that amount to add to their own money when the taxes come due to pay the taxes. So, if there are no other questions, I want to say thanks for joining. Sign up for the golf outing, and I'll see you next Monday. Have a good one.